Good morning, or whatever it is, wherever you are. So, sorting by notes per second in order to use that in our that property for our selection. And the interesting side effect of making this a linear, giving this a sort of pattern to it, which you can't really see as much anymore. Like it kind of started this way and rolled through. Now, I actually got to thinking that I had at one point, I thought I had sorted something by play count. So it's weight by play count. Oh, there is a table dot sort in here. Oh, I might not be able to do that sorted. I'd swear I'd looked at this and said, oh, we're not sorting anything. Yeah. So if I resort that, I'm undoing my play count weight. So what does that do to... Can I redo pick by range? Yeah, so I was taking it lazy and high because knew the last one we saw would be that. And then were we able to were we taking any shortcuts here? If we're less than the score in between NPS and not picked, so we would expect, well, I should have really looked at it better to get a sense of how much that might have changed. That should remove any bias towards lower notes per second songs. And until I get my selection range UI, well, I've got a lot of UI stuff to fix up, but we were kind of, that's actually in of itself an oopsie. And the sorting actually didn't do a heck of a lot for me. And there's some optimization I might want to do there because we're possibly evaluating scores multiple times. Hmm. So sorted by play count. Can't sort by notes per second. Well, and random other stuff. I guess if I kept the index of the if it was sorted and I kept the index of the high and the low, as well as the value, then I could do a slightly optimized search within that range. But that doesn't give us our preference for unplayed songs. Alright, so... so this double pass is bad. Well, this thing is getting tons of parameters. Most of which are kind of defined ad hoc. So we've got this build flow. Yeah, so everything used to be a singular flow before. Now we've got it defined. By a random wiggle, a score bound, and 2 notes per second bounds. Now the upper bound we're not really considering. Well, it only matters towards the ends, really. Otherwise, we count on the score to do it. I might be able to express that as a range from the highest notes per second. No, because you still don't want to do a super fast song right off the bat. Even the 2-point somethings here seem a little fast. Right, and we have selection range. But we also have to leave some selection range here. Remember, this has to be 1.5 plus our selection range. And actually, my selection range, 0.03 of what? Alright, that goes into here as the last parameter. Range is range, and that is just... Right, so that was 3% in the old system, and it's 0.03 notes per second in the new system? It's actually not a very wide range. But then we shouldn't be getting the 0.5s in there. Anyway, we've got these things that do not get updated when we build flow. Current flow, current flow, current flow. I'm probably going to have to write this function to reset a bunch of global variables. Because we pretty much only use it to change that one. And if we've got any parameters, we're going to want that replacing everything. Now, we use current flow gets used in a bunch of stuff. So it gets used for there, for the pick, graph it, bump, bump, bump. That's the actors that's drawing it. Yeah, so just, we can have a function, we just call it, so we can, whenever we update settings. So in our current system, we have that. So this would be define those things and call that. That leaves it doing a side effect thing, but I need to update multiple values. I guess I could define a structure. And then instead of having like 6 parameters to my function, it would just be some sort of curve definition. So just to make sure I remember all my Lewis syntax, do we do that anywhere else? I'm pretty sure I remember doing this somewhere else. Like when we're setting up our songs and selections, so just object property equals value. So what we have is return, and we probably need to change the name of this because it's going to be the current flow. Or maybe it's not a flow, I don't know. Notes per second upper bound. This is going to be a property list. I don't remember if it cares about trailing commas. So current flow would be, well, yeah, I mean, these are all kind of bounds. So then, build flow, we only have a current flow. Okay, so replace all those. Current flow is going to get used in a lot of places. This is now current flow. Well, we can actually pass this to all of these things. And maybe selection range should be part of that. However, these are, at the moment, still expecting simple parameters. And this is very, very old. Note that will give you realistic numbers. So just to kind of keep these compatible. And then we were passing stuff through here. Pick by range was getting past this. So lower bound flow.nps just for the number. Oh no, that was probably a score bound. Flow.nps lower bound. Da 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 da. Oh, maybe it was directly referencing that instead of the parameter. Okay, so that defines the min. Wait. Oh, is that one of the things where I was using... No. I had commented out upper bound. Why did I do that? Oh, probably because my NPS... there's a factor in there, but that explains why we're getting the 2.4, so we're not bounding that. Why did we... No, I've forgotten why I did that. Because that was actually something that got left over from the other day. We removed that. I've forgotten why. Oh, and for debugging purposes, I don't want all of this. Right. Oh, that was a new error. And you are doing... Maybe we lost our original model? Because you should not be spending any time on that screen. Or we're just never getting to the point where we finish. No, wrong button. One 557. Oh, right. These are individual curves at present, so it has to be dot wiggle y. Flow dot, I... Right, so the problem was actually drawing that screen. Oh, that's what we were counting on. The wiggle does a lower range towards the bottom. But it looks like that might not be doing enough constraint. Then again, I also don't want it to be super boring at the bottom. Yeah, there's a 2.3, 3.7. That's one where the score was unusually high. So I guess that's why you need the upper limit on the low end. Because you could have the really fast song that did well at. But that's like NPS upper bound. Alright, so that wasn't in play before, but I reduced it because I had stuff that was high. Maybe a little bit lower. And I'm not sure I'm seeing 2 as a limit here. 1.8. 1. Maybe that is too slow. Hmm. 9, 4.5, I have a 68 on. There's a 5.1 estimated 63. Yeah, I don't know if it's going to go that well. Probably still need to change my settings, and the settings are not currently easily tunable. And like, there's like 4 numbers here that could be tuned. Although maybe we could make this these two the same number. Might not make sense. And I suppose I should probably define a way to code a constant thing here. Although that used to be a constant value. And now our only actual use is doing it that way because we're defining our envelope with these. And we do kind of want those to be absolute limits. Hmm. I keep wondering if there's an easier way to represent this. Because this is kind of in notes per second space, but it's relative, whereas these are absolute. If I could scale things to be a center and extremes of the possible songs. Maybe you could define a single curve within that. Starting and ending would just be very tight to the center. Although I guess the center of high scoring might be a bunch of easy songs that would push you down to the ones again. Okay, so having this be a structure cleans up one of our function calls. So we're not kind of hacking around things. Um, so it's like these are all curves I have used at various times. And well, at some point we have to get back to our settings. Selection range might need to be changed. He went from... Okay, and the drawing it is going to be very off, but it seems like... Ooh. Right, I went to 8 plus or minus 3. That gives it a lot more latitude. Well, that means I just need to push back my centers because we have our selection range to deal with now. And I'm not drawing that to scale, so it sort of makes sense that it's got really blown out. Hitting those 2s right off the bat. Maybe the selection range should be a curve. But there's still kind of hard upper and lower bounds. Range is relative, bounds are absolute. But in theory, we have to be drawing all of this stuff. So you're passing through a singular value. But I am passing through I into some of this stuff. Well, okay, see, the arrows have a singular position, I think. I might want to have selection take the entire flow, because then it can get all of the things from its eye. Which makes me wonder if selection range should go in there as well. What's current? Oh, is current. Yeah. The selection range gets used here, and it gets passed into those functions. So everything else in there is a curve. Okay, so you're getting that from there for compatibility's sake. Well, graph flow is taking a single line, so that's fine. No, dot selection range. The ideal here would be that we don't need to pass that, although for a single number we do kind of have to do that. Oh, and then you would be getting the entire thing. Would you stop? Underscore. So that is the flow range. So the immediately compatible thing is flow dot wiggle sub I. Range. No. Pick by rate. We don't call that. Pick by range. Oh. I never changed you. No, that was still errors. Song list item 99. And if you get a nil value. Isn't that what I called it? Wait. Oh, right, yes, that was the specified value. Right, why does that not work? Did I not call it I? Ah, I called it N. Or maybe n's the total? Excuse me. Okay, there's no error. Those are in approximately the same space, but this is based on flow width, NPS scale, NPS baseline. Okay, so I obviously have a set size. Oh, you know what? Actually, yeah, to display this, I'm gonna need to be something else. Hmm. Hmm. Well, the selection range. No, because this does depend on the low and the high, so I have to calculate all that. So we're kind of stuck on that for now. But now this has data that could be used to draw other things. Like we have a and then the upper and lower notes per second bounds are absolute. NPS upper bound. Uh, It'll be a little bit closer to a score mark. Score bound. Flow mark. Bound mark. I don't know. This is going to be at flow dot score bound. And I'm going to have to use the different colors. This is predicted score, so actually we don't want. If anything, I want an actual score, which is just white for now. It's flow range, that was fine. No, that's not PS mark. Score bound. Hmm. I mean, I'm not sure. I mean, certainly at the moment, I want to be able to see that easier. I don't know if I want it to be a harder thing in or a brighter thing in general. So now we can see where that is. I think in general it's going to be in the same class as... our backdrop, which actually ends up showing up more by darkness. Or it's going to be in that same class of information. But then I have like several of these that I need to do. So that's our score bound. Now an NPS mark, lower bound, bound mark, not cell.nps, flow.nps lower bound dot n. Right, the selection range put that below our lower bound. You know, one way to handle this would be to tweak things so that actual bounds get pushed in by selection range. Upper bound. And the upper bound is kind of unlimited. It's really just there for the early songs. And that's actually extreme enough that I'm not sure it's doing a whole lot. I mean, there's a 2.1 right off the bat, so it's kind of only helping on the first song, maybe? I mean, it's certainly not doing anything here. Yeah, first or second. It seemed like without it, I got a bunch of twos here. That may have just been random luck. Well, there's a 2.1. And that's about my upper limit anyway. Well, no, there's no upper limit. So this is for the songs I've done really well at that were faster. So we need to come up with a better color scheme. And the limits need to be different than the mark itself. So the complexity of the selection criteria. I mean, I might need to have pick actually go through and record the range somewhere so that I can come back and draw it without having to recalculate everything every frame. So there's a pick by something. So we have selections on equals cell, cell selected, cell.stage. Cell is a possible step. Reset selected. Okay, so this is something I tack on in certain places. So I could put the high and low bounds in here. I could attach... Set selections. Set selection. Yeah, so it gets the cell. So we could put all relevant numbers directly into the selection. So we would have cell dot, min score. Then you wouldn't even have to pass the flow in. Well, these are very specific to the conditions picked, or conditions under which we were picked. The score we can get back. Oh, and this is not the overall range of the song. Right, we did that, and then I reused low and high. I'm not sure quite how that interacts with redefining local. But that would effectively be the sort of flow mark. Well, I'd have to do some tweaking on it. So actually, that could actually respect the actual range used to select it, so you could see if it got wider. Won't necessarily work well with the drawing system I've got. So this would be for the flow mark, flow range. Set size is and the XY is going to be like cell.nps low plus cell.nps high minus cell.nps low divided by 2. Because we're setting the center of it. Does redefining the low and the high not do what I think it does? Okay, there's the target. There's the range. Oh, range equals, no, range equals 0. And then wall selections and range less than 2. Let's see, what does 2 even mean? That might be old. That seems like an extremely generous selection range. Is it even affected by this? I'm clearly not doing what I think I'm doing here. Right, the difficulty arrows are all wrong. That looks like the full range as found up here. Not what we might have done here. Okay, so bugger off, we have no range. We're probably going to have a bunch of missed selections. Oh, right. It was based on range reaching a certain point. I'm gonna have to kill it. Because that's an actually infinite loop. I guess what we have to do. I mean, if it doesn't select anything. And that's to pick something in range, but I want to see if the range changes appreciably under any circumstances. Oops, we lost our toggle sample music there. Yeah, that's still drawing something huge. Maybe I'm scaling it wrong. But it should just be a notes per second value when we're drawing notes per second values. Oh, maybe I need to convert. Oh, right. Flow width. No, notes per second scale. Notes per second scale, notes per second baseline. It should be the right value. Order of operations. Oh, right. We need to change tabs. And now it's very, very small because we were trying to force it to something small. Okay, and we could maybe although I'd have to come up with new actual variable names. Naming is hard. Equals bottom plus top minus bottom. And then we need to redefine these as locals. Then we can say bottom top in order to get a visualization. Okay, so that's... Yeah, so you can actually see the bounds coming into play for most of these. on what the sort of allowable range is. I don't know if I want to be showing that. Bottom is clearly having an effect. The top is having an effect at the end. It's what it's supposed to do. Now we have a visualization problem. Because even there's the 2 marks in the range before were a little confusing. I might have to only show some of these factors when we're tweaking them. And we're going to have to make comparable changes to the show arrows thing, which gets us into the whole settings problem, the fact that we have like many more settings now. I also want to rejigger settings so that we can talk about highs and lows, and then the ranges will be within those bounds. Yeah, so we would define absolute highs and lows. And then those curves would be adjusted by selection range. Selection range is not currently an adjustable thing. We've had adjustable so far. Well, harder and easier is doing this weird thing with the warm-up and regular. We had degree of wiggle, which is kind of linear, but also hard to do. And that was it. We had the sort of peak and ends for score selection. We had the amount of variation in selection. And that was it. Now we've got a upper limit, 2 aspects of lower limit. We've got a upper score range, or lower score range, and a amount of variation, which itself has some internal parameters that's sort of tweaking it towards certain directions. Uh, I would have to set up something that graphs that curve to try and see what the possible wiggle range is. But we're trying to stick towards the bottom at the early end and then sort of expanding our range, but also keeping the bottom up. Which just kind of turns it into a settings nightmare. And it could come up with sort of decent defaults before, but the notes per second stuff is going to be very per player. The best I could do would be to come up with some sort of separate linear model that was only notes per second, so that we could try to pick the factors based on player skill. And I also want to play with the curve shaping parameters sometime, and possibly even replace the curve with one that goes a little faster on the warm up. Maybe. Oh geez, double 62. Yeah, oh, I'd curve fitting to pick the other curve. Hmm. What do I do with you? Is there any way... Well, I could make minimum speed a hard cutoff. That would reduce it to a single setting instead of several. And from the looks of things, wouldn't really affect... There's no practical effect to that. It's really only affecting us on this end. So the lower bound could be a singular thing. And then this bit is sort of like a early and late upper bound. I arbitrarily chose 10, which is around the highest notes per second of any song I've ever seen. But I suppose that you could pick that as something more player appropriate to curtail it more. So that removes one number from things. And you don't really need to draw it at that point. Infamous or bound. So even though you can define things, there are a couple of ways to define things that are effectively linear. It seems like you should maybe just have a constant flow. Oh no, so linear is 1-to-1. Might be interesting to play with that again. I don't seem to remember getting good results out of it before. Constant flow for stage to stages, stage equals x. And we want lower bound to be constant flow 1. Just to simplify things. Oh, my wiggle's a curve too. So that central thing is like a... Is that second order? Because there ends up being a sort of floor effect to it. And has that resulted in some decompression of the range? It's giving us wider swings. Maybe? it's just so many numbers. Is that it just keeps on bothering me. Oh, and I still haven't worked out how do we work harder? What does harder and easier mean? That's mostly going to be adjusting score bound, I think. Oh, we've actually got some start score, mid score. And then there is some score wiggle in there, but I forget what the range on that was. We've got a default value, right? Alright, so it's a 0 to 1 in the score range space right now. This is in just 0 to 1 space overall among the range in there. And we've essentially, yeah, this is actually it's actually a constant flow. We made that a flowable thing. Now, the value that we picked, yeah, like selection range, constant flow, those are all man. PWD. That's the global stuff. Scripts. So square wiggle is 0.05 right now. Whereas I'm doing 0.3, fudging it. I mean, that's a setting you can go in and change pretty easy. But that's based, well, actually, that would leave you to different min-max values, maybe? But this is essentially 0 plus score wiggle, which is not score wiggle anymore. So that's going to be very tight, and it's not being shown correctly. And I kind of want to look into why picks take so long. Yeah, all this UI overlay stuff is really messed up right now because our units are changing. I mean, I have suspicions about why it takes so long, but I haven't done any proper analysis of it. And then score bound is based on the start and mid score. We need completely different interfaces for setting those. Well, I guess I can sort of do the affects current song thing. Which is going to have some weird effects on the curve everywhere else. So difficulty and variation are assuming the big ones. So upper bound is still a constant, lower bound is a constant. Selection range is kind of a built-in thing. So the lower number of upper bound so the notes per second bounds might be able to get by with that. I might want to make lower and upper separate things. But that doesn't give me the I don't like this song. Well, maybe I keep the default control as bump this song and make whatever adjustments are necessary to do that. And then we also have, you can page through settings that do lower and upper bound. We're just going to need a lot of setting pages. I guess I could do it as one direction, left and right does one and up and down does the other or something. Put that in one extra page. Well, one extra page for our starting and midpoint. One extra page for notes per second limits. And that'll kind of describe it. probably won't end up showing the notes per second bound. Also, I need to think about how I incorporate selection range into this. Well, that might actually be an easy one. Well, now I could... Well, I don't think I want to tweak it by the low amount. I'm going to select anywhere within that range and then look near it. So what you really want to do is just make sure that your target is always... You could just do absolute checks. I could probably use this by flipping them. Won't really change anything, but it gives us a starting point. And then could I use that? Well, it still gives you, yeah, top to bottom if you can strain that. So this is upper bound minus flow dot selection range. Lower bound plus flow dot selection range. We've still got 0.8. Well, what this just says, we change our NPS. I mean, that's the thing we want to set it to. Yeah. It's like I bump all these numbers. And what we really want to do... Right, these are only our first and last values. Moving in your bottom doesn't help. You'll have to do this on each case. Lower bound plus upper bound minus. That should enforce the limits. Now I might be able to drop the limits a little bit as a consequence. See, before we used to be able to get an 0.8, which implies to me we should be able to get something close to a 1 or a 1.1. Oh, but we are, Maybe our current song selection is not up to it. I'm just kind of looking for a better way to set these, or a more intuitive way to set them. That does not net the same result. I think there's a very particular curve that hits something that would do that. Oh, that's actually doing the cutoff range. So we're not selecting within as wide of an area, because you might more cut out outliers. Well, we still got a pretty good range today. Or on this one. Alright, so long term, I think we probably drop the notes per second bounds, except maybe when setting them. Score bound kind of ends up being the thing we're setting. We could probably possibly leave that out when setting, or by default. And then the project for next time, which for code would be Friday, would be to get figure out what appears when. Try to remove as much as reasonable to reduce the noise. And get all the arrows and things to line up, because they're just irrelevant right now. Like, I don't even know what those arrows mean. That's out of scale. Yeah. And then see if there's any sensible way to organize things. Because wiggle and stages are kind of irrelevant. And wiggle, I don't even know how to describe what that's doing. And then we're going to have the score selection. Which wiggle is essentially notes per second space, relative notes per second space. Score selection is going to be high-low, current. And then we're going to have our min and max notes per second. So that put them closer to being related to wiggle, but not really, because they're absolute. Anyway, things are, well, we added more stuff. So to understand the problem. I just don't know if we've cleaned up any code yet. I do kind of want to think about, is it possible to do intermediate partial applications? Is this the thing we have? Yeah, there's curried Lua again. First class functions. Okay, so there's no language support for it. And they're doing a fancy function, but for my purposes, I could probably just have sets of functions that reference the appropriate things. So I'm kind of wondering if I could turn flows into functions rather than arrays, because that way I could do higher resolution visualizations, which is something I was doing for very, very special cases before. That would make it easier to get smooth visualizations of all these curves. Not that I'm doing that right now, but maybe it would make sense for setting some things. Okay, so the indentation there is pretty bad. I mean, these were originally globals. It's just we've got a bunch of functions here we might want to return to someday. Or use for debugging things. Or maybe this was a notes per second flow. This was a notes per second flow. This is probably a meter flow. That's completely constant. That's very similar to that. And that was the old stuff we did, so that's Right, some fix-ups for that. All the new marks. Flow table showing a bunch of All right, so that's whip. Next up is going to be actually playing this. I don't think there's been any major changes in the algorithm today. It's kind of something I'm still experimenting with, seeing how it feels. Well, it does feel like the limit change may have had a bigger effect than anticipated. We'll have to see. So programming stream is over. I'm going to drop settings back in a little bit to play this game, but I do need to change some settings because right now I've got it set for text resolution and the game is going to want more of a frame rate. If you're here for code, thanks for dropping by. If you are about to hang out for Stepmania, cool. Let's see. Speaking of which, thanks for all the hosts. I'm not going to host anybody right now because I'm coming right back. I'm running coding in the mornings and then most days going on into Stepmania. I will be back in a few minutes to, well, I have to change settings. I have to get the mat set up. A whole bunch of stuff. I'll be right back.